Have you ever watched someone get promoted and within weeks they interrupt more, they listen less, they seem a little less curious about what everyone else is feeling? Maybe that someone was you? Welcome to Mind Decoded. I'm Dr. Ann.
And I'm Zach. Dr. Ann, what are we unpacking today?
Power and the quiet, measurable way it changes how our brains treat other people.
Oh, so we're going full workplace psychology today? Because honestly, everyone I know has a story about a boss or a team lead who became a completely different person the moment they got the title.
That's precisely why this matters. And here's the question I want us to sit with. What if that person didn't actually decide to change?
Wait, are you saying it's not just them being, well, a jerk?
It's not just character, Zach. It's a psychological process with a name, and researchers have been mapping it for decades. Social psychologists call it power corruption.
Power corruption. Okay, that phrase alone sounds like a thriller title.
It does, doesn't it? But the reality is both more subtle and, honestly, more fascinating. The research suggests this can happen to almost anyone, including people who start out kind, thoughtful, and genuinely well-intentioned.
All right, I need the full picture here because I have definitely been on the receiving end of this at work. And to be honest, now I'm starting to wonder if I've ever been on the giving end without noticing.
That without noticing is the key phrase, because power rarely corrupts like a switch being flipped. It corrodes slowly and quietly below the surface of conscious awareness.
Okay, before we go further, let's define the term for anyone who's new to this. What exactly do psychologists mean by power corruption?
Good call. In social psychology, power corrosion, or power corruption, refers to a pattern where gaining power over others systematically lowers our empathy, increases our sense of being right, and loosens the moral constraints that normally guide our behavior.
So it's not about evil people gaining power, it's about power itself doing something to people.
Exactly. And one way to think about it is this. Power is like a spotlight. When you have very little of it, the spotlight points outward toward your boss, your customers, the people whose approval you need. You're constantly scanning them, reading their faces, adjusting your tone.
Right, because those people can make your life easier or much harder.
Yes, but the moment you gain power, that spotlight swings around and points directly at yourself, your goals, your urgency, your perspective. And when the spotlight points inward, the people around you literally start to fade into the background of your attention.
That's uncomfortably vivid, and I can already think of times when I've been in charge of a small project and suddenly everyone else's schedule felt like an inconvenience to me.
That's the mechanism showing up in real time. And the fact that you noticed it, that's exactly the kind of self-awareness we're building in this episode. Let me take you to the research. One of the landmark contributions comes from Dacher Keltner at UC Berkeley. He and his team proposed something called the approach-inhibition theory of power.
Okay, approach inhibition, that sounds like jargon. Break that down for me.
Sure, this is one of those terms worth unpacking. Think of your brain as having two basic behavioral systems. One is the approach system. It pushes you toward rewards, toward things you want, toward action. The other is the inhibition system. It holds you back, makes you cautious, makes you check your surroundings before you act.
So like a gas pedal and a brake.
That's exactly the analogy. Now here's what Keltner found. Power dials up the gas and dials down the brake. When people feel powerful, their approach system gets louder and their inhibition system gets quieter.
Which would explain why powerful people talk over others, make snap decisions, and just go for things.
Right. And here's the twist that surprised me most when I first read this research. In many controlled studies, the people who felt powerful were far more likely to act on impulse. They grabbed more snacks from a shared plate. They spoke first in group discussions. They even doodled more during meetings.
Wait, doodling? That's an actual finding?
An actual finding. When people were randomly assigned to a position of power in a lab, they were more likely to do things like doodle, zone out, and check their phones. It's as though their brain quietly said, I don't need to track these people because I'm not accountable to them.
Okay. That's both funny and a little chilling. Because I'm picturing a manager in a meeting doing exactly that, and now I know there may be a psychological mechanism underneath it. But didn't you also say power changes empathy?
That's the next layer. In the mid-2000s, Adam Galinsky and colleagues ran a series of experiments where they would randomly make people feel powerful or powerless in a lab and then test how well they could read other people's emotions.
So they could actually measure empathy in a lab?
They could. In one experiment, participants looked at photographs of faces and had to guess which emotion the person was feeling from the eyes alone. The people primed to feel powerful made significantly more errors than people primed to feel powerless.
Wait, so just the feeling of power, even in a fake lab setting, made people worse at reading emotions?
Just the feeling. And here's what I find genuinely fascinating. The powerless participants were actually better at reading faces. The theory is that when you're low in power, your survival depends on accurately reading the people who can help or hurt you. So your brain invests heavily in that skill.
That makes so much sense. Like when you're the new person at work, you're hyper aware of everyone's tone, mood, and unspoken rules.
Exactly. And when you're the boss, that mental budget shrinks. Because in your brain's cost-benefit analysis, tracking your subordinates' feelings is no longer the highest priority.
And it's not that the boss wants to be cold, they're just not spending the same cognitive resources.
Right. This is the crucial shift from "I don't care about your feelings," which is a moral statement, to "my brain is not automatically tracking your feelings," which is a perceptual shift. The outcome looks similar from the outside, but the internal mechanism is completely different.
And what about the moral part? You said power loosens moral restraint too.
Let me point to another famous line of research. Back in 1972, David Kipnis ran studies showing that when people were given control over others' outcomes, like deciding a coworker's tasks or evaluations, they were more likely to devalue the people they controlled.
E-value? So they start thinking less of the people who work under them?
Exactly. Kipnis found that powerful people rated their subordinates as less inherently competent, and they actually preferred to keep more distance from them. There's a term for this, psychological distancing. The more control you have over someone, the less you need to engage with their inner world.
That's wild. So power doesn't just make you less able to read people, it actually makes you want to stay farther from them.
And that distance becomes dangerous because once you stop seeing someone as a full person with a rich inner life, it becomes much easier to treat them in ways that would have bothered you before.
This is where it gets dark.
It does. And this is exactly the trajectory we saw in the Stanford Prison Experiment in 1971. Philip Zimbardo and his team randomly assigned college students to be guards or prisoners in a simulated prison, and within days, the guards were enacting genuinely cruel behavior.
Yeah, that experiment always haunted me. But I remember hearing it got a lot of criticism later.
It did, and rightly so, because the design had major flaws. Zimbardo himself got pulled into the role of prison superintendent, which compromised the science, but what survived the criticism is the core psychological insight: roles and power can reshape behavior faster than most of us expect.
So we're not saying the Stanford experiment proves we're all latent monsters. We're saying it shows how quickly context and power can change behavior.
That's the honest reading. And later, more controlled studies backed up the basic pattern that authority shifts attention, reduces empathy, and loosens inhibition.
Okay, Dr. Ann, I need to pause here because I just caught myself in this research, and it's honestly a little uncomfortable.
Tell me about it.
A couple of years ago, I was made the lead on a team project. My first time really leading people. And within maybe 2 weeks, I noticed that I'd stopped asking one of the quieter team members for her opinion in meetings. She'd always shared good ideas before, but when I had the lead role, I just stopped making room for her.
And what was going through your mind in those moments?
Honestly, it wasn't malicious. It was more like I already know what she'd say, or we don't have time to go around the room. But the fact is, I was treating her voice as less essential. And when I think back now, I can see she noticed. She got quieter.
That's exactly the process we're describing. And I want to say this gently. Noticing it now is not evidence that you were a secret bad person. It's evidence that the mechanism was running in the background and you didn't have a framework for it yet.
That's both reassuring and a little scary. Because if I did it once when I was in charge of one small project, What would happen with a bigger role?
That's the right question. And the science has a surprising answer. Awareness is a genuine intervention. Simply knowing that power changes how you perceive people can help you correct for it.
Let's go a little deeper, because I want to understand what's actually happening inside the brain when this occurs. You mentioned the spotlight turning inward. What's the cognitive machinery behind that?
A big part of it is something called reduced mirroring. Our brains have a network of neurons, often called the mirror neuron system, that activates both when we do something and when we watch someone else do it. It's part of how we simulate other people's experiences.
Like if I see you smile, part of my brain fires as if I'm smiling too.
Right. That mental simulation is a big part of empathy. But research suggests that when we feel powerful, the simulation gets weaker. We spend less time internally rehearsing what the other person is feeling.
So the empathy isn't turned off by force. It just gets deprioritized, like a background tab on a computer.
That's a great image. Think of it like your brain running a background program that tracks other people's emotions. When you have power, that program gets pushed further into the background and starts using less processing power.
And that's why the effect can sneak up on you. You don't feel yourself becoming less caring. You just notice one day that you're less patient, less curious, more annoyed by people's needs.
Exactly. And that connects to a related finding. Powerful people tend to become more goal-focused and less context-aware. Researchers call this the goal-focus effect of power. When you have a goal and the power to pursue it, your attention narrows to the goal and the obstacles, and people start to look like either obstacles or resources.
Wow. So people stop being fully people in your perception. They become instrumental.
That's the term researchers use, instrumental framing. And it's one of the most corrosive parts of power because the shift feels neutral from the inside. You're just being efficient, meeting deadlines, hitting targets.
Okay. So what do we do with all this? Because most people listening right now have some power, a manager, a parent, a teacher, a lead on a project. How do we stop ourselves from sliding into this?
First, let me say, the goal isn't to feel guilty about the fact that power changes us. The research is clear that this is a natural response, not a personal failure, that reframe matters, because guilt tends to make us defensive, and defensiveness makes us double down on the very behavior we want to change.
That's a good point. If I beat myself up for missing a teammate's feelings, I'm more likely to justify it than to fix it.
Exactly. So step 1 is to understand the mechanism without shame. Step 2 is to build in what I call forced perspective taking. Researchers have found that when powerful people are explicitly instructed to imagine the situation from another person's point of view, their empathy performance improves significantly.
So literally asking yourself, what does this look like from their side, can counteract the effect.
Yes. In Galinsky's studies, when they asked powerful participants to step into someone else's shoes, their ability to read emotions came back. The mechanism is corrigible. It can be counteracted if you make perspective taking a deliberate practice.
That's really hopeful, actually. So it's not once you have power, you lose empathy forever. It's more like your empathy goes on standby and you have to deliberately wake it up.
That's the practical takeaway. Another strategy is to reduce unnecessary distance. Kipnis's research suggested that distance fuels devaluation. So if you can create regular low-stakes contact with the people who report to you, not performance reviews, but actual conversations, you feed your brain the data it stopped collecting on its own.
Like actually eat lunch with your team instead of eating at your desk and wondering why they feel distant.
Exactly. And listen, this isn't just advice for bosses. If you're on the receiving end of someone's power, this frame can also help you depersonalize it. When your manager seems less empathic, it may not be about you at all. It may be the spotlight effect of their role.
That's actually a huge comfort, because I think we spend a lot of energy feeling rejected by bosses and leaders when actually they're just not paying attention in the way they used to.
Right. And knowing that can lower the emotional temperature of a lot of workplace interactions. You can say to yourself, okay, this isn't evidence that I'm failing. This is what power does to attention.
And look, once you understand the mechanism behind this, you might actually feel more compassion for yourself, because this isn't a character flaw, it's a brain feature. The challenge is to stay awake while it's happening.
Beautifully said. And that's the work, staying awake.
Okay, before we wrap, I have to say, this conversation is changing how I'll look at the next meeting I'm in. If you're listening and you've ever felt this shift in yourself or watched it in someone else, you should subscribe to Mind Decoded. We unpack one psychological concept every episode. No jargon, all research, and it's a daily show.
New episodes every day. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us again tomorrow.
So, Dr. Ann, as we close out, what's the one thing you want listeners to carry into their day?
I'd say this: the next time you have even a little bit of power, leading a meeting, assigning tasks, making a decision that affects someone else, pause and ask yourself whose perspective you haven't considered today. Because empathy doesn't disappear under power, it just goes quiet. And the simple act of asking can turn the volume back up.
That's a beautiful place to land. Dr. Ann, thank you for decoding power for us today.
Thanks, Zach, and thank you for listening to Mind Decoded. We'll see you in the next episode.
Hi, everyone.